The Trump administration is now strongly considering a bailout. For who? The oil and gas industry. Because, of course, right? Now, this is according to the Washington Post. White House officials, alarmed at the prospect that numerous shale companies, many of them deep in debt, could be driven out of business if downturn in oil prices turns into a prolonged crisis or continues to be prolonged. Uh, that they could again they could go out of business, and that's not good. So they have a solution. Now, as I mentioned, that solution is bailouts. So now, before we get into more details about that, I want to talk about what precipitated this. Simply put, you had low interest rates uh, that were, put forward by the Fed as Donald Trump has uh, continued to pressure the Fed to continue to cut interest rates, keep them low. Well, since there was low interest rates, these corporations decided to borrow a whole lot of money. They over leveraged themselves. Now, that means basically that they couldn't pay back those loans that they had borrowed, right? Especially if the market took a dive. So now, what a lot of people don't know is that corporate debt is actually one of the next biggest bubbles, right? Now, before, back in 2007, 2008, mortgage prices, home prices were the bubble. Now it's corporate debt. These corporations, because of all this low interest rates, they have been borrowing money and borrowing money. And then the same banks that will loan them the money, they'll then collateralize it, put it into packages, and sell them as derivatives and even start to bet against them. So, I mean, disastrous, right? So now you had COVID-19, which caused gigantic drops in the stock market. And then you had the Saudi Arabian government refusing to deal with the OPEC, cutting prices, increasing production. Well, now the price of oil has dropped. And now, simply put, these corporations are in big trouble. If they continue to lose this money, then they will not be able to pay back their loans. And so now that's a really simplistic way of putting the problem, right? It's actually a lot more complex. It's involved. And you've got futures and derivative markets, and you've got lending, you've got interest rates, et cetera, right? But they're in trouble. They're in trouble. We're in trouble. Not good, very bad, as Michael Burks would put it. So the Trump administration is planning to bail them out of their own mess that they put themselves into by borrowing more money than they can actually pay back by, and this is the genius idea, lending them more money at low interest rates. Now, the Post reports that the federal assistance is likely to take the form of low-interest government loans to the shale companies, whose lines of credit to major financial institutions have been choked off. Oh, goody. So we're going to pay off low-interest debt with more low-interest debt. Because, that is totally sustainable and actually puts us, taxpayers, on the hook. Now, we're on the hook instead of the banks, which would fail, right? If they don't get the money that they loaned out to these companies would fail, right? And you've got this entire house of cards that's basically ready to fall over and take us into a recession. So that's a disaster. I mean, this is a collapse that is coming. That is basically here. And so the Trump administration, bailing out oil companies with more loans, with more debt on the taxpayers' side. The reaction to it, the announcement of this plan was not good. In fact, I've got some responses here. Mike Gillette says, so, socialism, but only for billionaires. Now remember, this is at a time where 45 to 68,000 people a year die from lack of health care, right? And we can't get Medicare for all, but Trump can bail out the oil companies, the shale companies, right? Lolo says, as usual, corporations are more important than people. Oh, wait, the Supreme Court said corporations are people, right? As did Mitt Romney. Need I remind you, right? J. Lane Wood says the U.S. Treasury is like a big giveaway box for every rich person and corporation in the country. That is entirely true, sadly so. Now, Congressman Ed Markey also said something about this. They said the White House is proposing to bail out the fossil fuel industry. We need more CV-19 testing, not more fracking. We should be working to pass a Green New Deal and deliver climate justice, not delivering an unjust payout to Trump's billionaire oil and gas cronies. Now, this isn't the first time, of course, the Trump administration has tried to not just bail out, but more prop up the fossil fuel industry. He tried doing it with coal, and it didn't work. Coal is a dying industry. But now you have shale, also a dying industry. By the way, we wouldn't be in this mess if we had, in renewable energy. We focused completely on renewables, solar, wind, and geothermal, right? That kind of stuff. Instead, no, double down. And then, by the way, these companies will go get themselves into more debt and then expect us to bail them out. Of course, right? Now, Food and Water Watch says after one of his billionaire friends lost big money yesterday, Trump is now preparing to bail out fracking companies affected by dropping oil prices. This is outrageous, especially on the heels of cuts to food stamps and the EPA. Eric Holhaus says, this is it. This is what I was worried about. And now it's happening. The Trump administration is more worried about bailing out oil industry tycoons than saving the lives of its citizens. That is absolutely true. But again, we told you about that. We knew that was going to happen. All right. And then Jared Yates Sexton says, yes, the people who need help and relief in this global pandemic are the shale companies that just happen to be owned by some of Donald Trump's closest friends. Forget tests and healthcare and assistance to people losing their jobs and lives. Shale. But if we don't help them, some people will argue, we'll lose jobs. We're going to lose jobs in the fracking industry. You know what's funny? I'm actually kind of tired of people's lives and livelihoods being held hostage by irresponsible corporate boards. And so it is interesting to hear that argument, right? We're going to lose jobs. People are going to lose their jobs if we don't give this corporation free money. Great. Look, you guys knew you over-leveraged on those loans. Why don't you just practice some fiscal responsibility and pull yourself up by your own bootstraps instead of asking for the government to subsidize you? Stop relying on big government oil companies. I mean, it is really fun to turn their own bullshit against them. But look, to be honest, this is a serious problem that these companies under Trump and the Republicans and corporate Democrats will bail them out. But at the same time, there will very likely be workers who lose their jobs as a result, and there is no bailout for them. I mean, we are still recovering from the last corporate recession when Wall Street did the same thing with mortgage-backed securities. And we as a society have learned nothing. Actually, no, scratch that. We have learned something. At least these people on Wall Street have. They learned that no matter what they do, the government, under a Democrat or Republican, will provide billions of dollars in taxpayer money for relief. Because, face it, our country is owned by the corporations. And maybe, just maybe it's about time we take it back. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on, and you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.